He was broke at 27 years old, crashing on a friend's couch, eating cheap pizza and trying to convince other people to buy software they didn't think they needed. At 41, he became a billionaire, selling his startup for $5.7 billion during the dot-com boom. And today, he's one of the most recognizable names in business, an investor, a media mogul, a sports team owner, and a shark. But behind Mark Cuban's loud personality and force-talking charm is a story that most people never hear. A story about rejection, obsession, hustle, and how one guy with no connections, no fancy degrees, and no money built an empire from the ground up. This is the real story of how Mark Cuban went from bartending and sleeping on floors to building a billion-dollar fortune. Mark Cuban was born on July 31st, 1958 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, a tough blue-collar city built on steel and sweat. His father, Norton Cuban, worked long hours as an automobile upholsterer, fixing seats in cars for $40 a day. He didn't love his job, but he showed up every single day. To Mark, that was his first real lesson in discipline. His mother, Shirley, often bounced between odd jobs. She once told John Mark that he should learn to be a carpenter, just in case. But Mark didn't want to be just in case. He wanted more. Their neighborhood wasn't dangerous, but it also wasn't rich. Money was tight. Vacations weren't a thing. If something broke, you fixed it. If you wanted something extra, you worked for it. Mark learned that early. At just 12 years old, when he wanted a new pair of basketball shoes, his dad told him they couldn't afford it. So Mark found a local supplier for garbage bags, bought them wholesale and went door to door in his neighborhood, selling them to earn money. That wasn't a school project, that was a survival instinct. He also sold stamps, coins, baseball cards, anything with a margin. Not because someone told him to, but because he genuinely loved the hustle, loved the game of buying low and selling high. Even then, he had a mind wired for business. In high school, Mark started reading business sections of the newspaper before most kids were even aware. He listened to AM talk radio about markets and finance, not because someone made him, but because he wanted to understand how the world worked. And while he was always intelligent, he didn't always follow the rules. He skipped his entire senior year of high school, enrolling directly into the University of Pittsburgh. Not because he was a genius prodigy, but because he saw no point in wasting a year doing something he felt was a box-checking exercise. After a year in Pittsburgh, he transferred to Indiana University's Kelley School of Business. Why Indiana? Because out of the top business schools, it was the cheapest. While at Indiana, Mark didn't just attend class, he worked constantly. He bartended, he taught disco dancing, he gave lessons, ran a chain letter scheme, organized frat parties, and once even made thousands selling a Monty Q t-shirt before a concert, without even having a permit. If there was money to be made, Mark found a way. And while his grades were just average, his education never stopped at the classroom. He read constantly, business books, tech manuals, investing guides, always trying to get an edge. That curiosity is what made him dangerous. He graduated in 1981 with a business degree, and not long after, he made a bold move. He left Pittsburgh. No job, no safety net, just a dream of doing something bigger, and a bus ticket to Dallas, Texas. He was 23 years old, no money, no connections, and no plan B. But for Mark Cuban, that's exactly how he liked it. Mark Cuban didn't grow up dreaming about yachts or billion-dollar valuations. He just hated being broke. He hated asking for help, hated limits, and more than anything, he hated the idea of wasting time. He once said, "Work like there's someone working 24 hours a day to take it all from you." That's how he lived. In Dallas, he had no connections, no job lined up, no money. He crashed on a friend's floor, slept on cushions from the couch, took whatever work he could get, bartending, selling software, working odd gigs. But he was always reading, always studying, obsessed with business, software, and figuring out how things work. If he didn't know something, he'd stay up all night reading until he did. He wasn't flashy back then. He was scrappy, hungry, and laser focused on figuring out how to create value without waiting for permission. When Mark Cuban arrived in Dallas in the early 1980s, he had exactly one goal: make enough money to live on his own terms. He didn't know a single person in the city, no job offers, no long-term plan, so he did what he always did. He hustled. He started bartending at a local bar called Elan to make ends meet. The shifts were long, the tips weren't great, but he didn't complain. He saved every dollar he could and spent his off hours learning. He walked into a small local company called Your Business Software, one of the first PC software retailers in Dallas. He talked his way into a sales job, even though he didn't know much about computers. He promised them that he'd learn fast, and he did. He devoured user manuals. He taught himself how every program worked. He wasn't just selling software, he was helping clients solve real problems. He became one of the top employees, but not everyone appreciated that. One morning, Mark had a meeting with a client who wanted to make a big software purchase. And instead of opening the store like he was supposed to, Mark went to this meeting. And he closed it for $15,000, a huge win for the company. But then when he came back to the office, he was fired. The owner didn't care about the sale. He cared that Mark didn't open the store on time. And just like that, Mark was out of a job. Most people would have been devastated. But Mark saw it as freedom. He took that one client and used it as a foundation for his first company, Micro Solutions. He called up his friends, asked for help, got a $500 credit line from a local vendor. No investors, no seed funding, just relationships, word of mouth, and relentless grit. Micro Solutions started out of his apartment. Mark handled everything himself: cold calls, installations, tech support, bookkeeping. He wasn't the best coder, he wasn't the trained engineer, but he listened to his clients and he outworked everyone else. His reputation grew. He didn't just sell software, he explained it in plain English. He made businesses more efficient. He gave small companies the tools they needed to compete with the big guys. And word spread fast. By the 1980s, Micro Solutions was bringing in millions in revenue, with clients ranging from small law firms to major corporations. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't flashy, but it was a real business. In 1990, after 7 years of non-stop grind, ComputerServe, then one of the biggest names in tech, offered to buy Micro Solutions for $6 million. After taxes, Mark walked away with around $2 million in the bank. He was just 32 years old. That deal gave him one of the things he wanted since he was a kid: freedom. He bought a modest house, a few toys, and more importantly, he bought himself time. On paper, Mark Cuban had already won. He sold Micro Solutions for millions. He was financially free before most people hit their stride. But what most people don't see is what happened next. Because freedom doesn't mean direction. After the sale, Mark drifted for a while. He partied, traveled, bought a lifetime pass on American Airlines for $250, which he used constantly. He called it net jetting before private jets were even a thing. But underneath the excitement, there was something missing. He wasn't building anything, and that hunger, the one that kept him up all night reading software manuals, started to come back. It showed up in form of a problem. He couldn't listen to the Indiana Hoosiers basketball games in Dallas. In a world before podcasts and live streams, there was no easy way to stream audio across the internet. So Mark thought, why not build it? He partnered with his friend Todd Wagner, a lawyer turned entrepreneur, and together they launched AudioNet, a simple idea with massive complexity: streaming live audio on the internet. But that idea in the mid-90s was a technological nightmare. Most people didn't even have broadband. Audio compression was terrible, servers crashed constantly, and there was no roadmap. Mark and Todd were building something people didn't understand, on a platform that barely worked. They had no external funding, no media attention, no blueprint, just long nights, buggy software, and a growing list of skeptics. And yet they kept going. They rebranded as Broadcastcom and started adding more content: sports games, corporate events, radio talks. But every step forward came with setbacks. Licensing was a legal minefield. They had to negotiate streaming rights, often getting rejected or outbid. Engineers struggled to make the product stable. Servers overloaded constantly, and one day the server error knocked them offline during a major college game. They got death threats from angry fans. Mark took the heat personally. He stayed up, fixing bugs, writing code, rebuilding everything from scratch if he had to. He wasn't a polished CEO, he was a wartime founder. Every day felt like a gamble. They were burning money fast. There were moments they couldn't make payroll unless another deal closed. And the industry was brutal. Giants like Real Networks, Microsoft and Yahoo were starting to sniff around the space. Any one of them could have crushed Broadcast.com overnight with more resources and a better pitch. But what they didn't have was Mark Cuban. He refused to play defense, he made noise, took bold bets, and he pushed his team to move faster than the Giants could. Even when tech was shaky, the mission was clear. Be first. Be loud, get attention, get users. In 1998, they finally broke through. Broadcast.com went public, and the IPO exploded. The company shares skyrocketed by nearly 250% on one day. But the pressure didn't stop there. The dot-com bubble was inflating fast. Every analyst was waiting for the crash, and inside the company, tensions were rising. Mark knew that window was closing. If they were going to sell, it had to be now. So he started taking meetings, and when Yahoo came to the table in 1999, offering $5.7 billion in stock, he didn't blink. Mark knew the internet was about to shift, valuations were bloated, and the bubble was stretching too far. He timed it perfectly. Within 2 years of the sale, the dot-com bubble burst. Hundreds of internet startups went under, but Mark had already exited. And he didn't just build a company, he survived the storm that followed. At 41 years old, Mark Cuban became a billionaire, almost overnight. He had no debts, no investors to pay back, and a massive payout and total freedom. But instead of coasting, Mark got even more aggressive. He diversified immediately. He bought real estate, invested in startups, built a hedge fund. In 2000, he made his most high-profile move yet. He bought the Dallas Mavericks for $285 million. At the time, the team was a disaster, barely filling seats, losing games, and bleeding money. But Mark didn't care about the losses. He cared about culture, about fixing what was broken. He revamped the locker room, put TVs in the stadium, and he didn't sit down in some fancy office at the stadium. He sat down in the middle of his cold calling team. Imagine a billionaire cold calling himself. That's the man Mark Cuban is. He called former customers and sold them on coming back to the next Dallas Mavericks game. His reasoning for working this way is, I wanted everyone to see, if I asked them to do it, I would do it. He showed up to games in t-shirt and jeans, sat courtside, yelled at refs, lived and breathed the team. And within only a few years, the Mavs were back. Playoffs run, sold out games, international stars. And in 2011, Mark Cuban's Mavericks won the NBA championship. It wasn't just a sports win, it was proof that business done right can transform anything. Today, Mark Cuban is worth an estimated $5.4 billion. Mark remains a minority owner of Mavericks. He has stakes in over 100 companies. He's also stepping away from Shark Tank after 16 seasons. Not because he's done investing, but because he wants to focus on something new. Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs, a company he co-founded to fight against overpriced prescription medication. The idea is simple: transparency in drug pricing, selling generic meds at cost plus a 15% markup. It's already making waves and saving lives. But for Mark, it's not just about money anymore, it's about impact. He mentors entrepreneurs, funds medical research, speaks out on issues ranging from healthcare to AI ethics. But he's still the same guy who sold garbage bags at 12 years old. Mark Cuban's story isn't about overnight success. It's about relentless learning, about betting on yourself even when no one else will. You don't need permission, you don't need connections, you just need to start. And if you found this story inspiring, don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of ambition, grit, and success.